The most copied coach in football spent 3 decades building systems that every team in the world tried to replicate. None of them could. The one person who came closest to getting it wrong was him. His name generates immediate reactions: admiration, irritation, the particular exhaustion of watching a team play 50 passes before scoring. What it rarely generates is the right question. This is not a story about titles. It is a story about whether the same mind can build a revolution twice, and what it costs when it tries. Football history is full of great teams. It is much harder to find a coach who changed the game itself. If you enjoy stories like this, leave a like and subscribe. 2 different clubs, 2 different countries, 2 different sets of players, languages, and football cultures. 2 systems that are structurally distinct from each other in ways that matter, and 1 coach who had to dismantle everything he believed in to build the second one. The strange thing about revolutions is that most of them only happen once. This story begins with the possibility that one man built 2. If that sounds like your kind of football story, leave a like and subscribe. 2 revolutions is already a number no coach in history has matched. The question no resume can answer is whether a third is coming, or whether the 2 that already exist were something that cannot happen again. Before any title, there was an idea, and before the idea there was Johan Cruyff. Positional play, juego de posición, is not about having the ball. It is about controlling the space between the lines while the other team chases its own shadow. Cruyff brought this concept to Barcelona as a coach in the late 1980s, a 4-3-3 built not around individual quality but around spatial occupation, numerical superiorities in specific zones, and the principle that the team that controls space controls the game. Guardiola played under Cruyff at Barcelona from 1990. He learned the concept from the inside. What Guardiola added was the second movement, pressing immediately after losing the ball. Within 6 seconds of losing possession, the entire team collapses on the space around the ball to prevent the transition. Possession as a weapon of exhaustion, pressing as a weapon of recovery. The combination made the system active in both moments of the game, not just when Barcelona had the ball. What Cruyff taught was not a formation, Guardiola said in 2011. It was a way of seeing the game. Everything I have done comes from that. The system needed one specific component to reach its maximum intensity: a player who could occupy the space vacated by a false 9, a center forward who dropped deep, creating confusion in defensive structures that had no training model for the position. In May 2009, at the Bernabeu, Messi played that role against Real Madrid. Barcelona won 6-2. Real Madrid's defenders spent 90 minutes trying to mark a center forward who was never where a center forward should be. The space opened and no one knew who was responsible for closing it. The journalist Sid Lowe, writing for The Guardian after that game, described the scene on the Bernabeu pitch as a demonstration of football at a level of organization and beauty that the game had not previously produced simultaneously. Barcelona won 14 titles in 4 years. The 5-0 El Clásico in November 2010 was the most complete public exhibition of the system. Real Madrid, managed by Mourinho with a specific defensive plan, couldn't contain a team that controlled not the ball but the geometry of the spaces the ball would eventually reach. Guardiola left Barcelona in the summer of 2012. He was 41, exhausted, and the entire football world had spent 4 years taking notes. What happened next is the part of the story most people skip, and shouldn't. Bayern Munich had just won the treble under Jupp Heynckes. Guardiola arrived and made them worse in Europe for 3 consecutive years: 3 Bundesliga titles, 3 Champions League semi-final exits, against Real Madrid in 2014, against Barcelona in 2015, against Atletico Madrid in 2016. Bayern had Robben, Ribéry, Müller, Lewandowski, Neuer, perhaps the most talented squad in Europe at the time. The tactical system Guardiola imposed was theoretically superior to what they had before. The outcomes at the highest level were worse. The criticism was consistent: over-complexity. A system designed for a specific squad that didn't adapt to a different set of players. Tactical demands that confused rather than clarified. But the more precise diagnosis was structural. By 2013, every elite European coach had studied Barcelona for 4 years. The semi-final opponents knew what to expect from a Guardiola team. They had been preparing for it specifically. The system hadn't failed. It had become predictable. And a predictable revolution is no longer a revolution. What Munich produced was not a failure. It was a question. If the specific conditions that made the Barcelona system revolutionary no longer existed, what was the next iteration? What would a Guardiola system look like that had never been seen before? 3 years in Munich, 3 semi-final exits. The system that had dismantled Real Madrid couldn't dismantle a Champions League knockout stage once every team knew what to expect. The question that remained was whether the answer was a better version of the same idea, or a different idea entirely. Manchester City, 2016. No Champions League title in the club's history. No deep European tradition. A coach arriving with a thesis he needed to disprove. The central innovation at City had no equivalent in Barcelona. The inverted fullback. Cancelo, Walker, Zinchenko, traditional wide defenders repositioned as interior midfielders in possession, inverting into the center to create numerical overloads in the spaces where the opposition's midfield should be. Barcelona had never used this mechanism. The reason is specific. Barcelona had Messi and world-class wide forwards to create the wide-to-central progressions the system required. City didn't, so Guardiola redesigned the fullback position to create those progressions from a different starting point. What we do here is not Barcelona, Guardiola said at City in 2019. The principles are the same. The solutions are completely different. Because the players are different, the league is different, everything is different. The deepest proof came in the 2021-22 season. Sergio Aguero, City's all-time leading scorer, had left the previous summer. Guardiola built a league-winning season without a conventional center forward, rotating Bernardo Silva, Foden, and De Bruyne through the central position, each functioning as the consequence of a positional system rather than the mechanism driving it. A team that had been defined by a specific scorer became a team that could produce goals from any position on the pitch. Then, in 2022-23, Haaland arrived, and Guardiola reintegrated the conventional center forward, not as the system's anchor but as its finishing point. The player who had built a revolution without a striker then built a treble with one. Premier League, FA Cup, Champions League, the first in Manchester City's history. The tactical analyst Jonathan Wilson, writing on the 2023 treble, described the City system as the only major European project of the past decade that achieved a genuine structural departure from what Guardiola himself had done before. Not an evolution, but a refoundation. The treble confirmed the second revolution. 2 years earlier, at the same competition's final, Guardiola had handed Chelsea the trophy with a team selection. He left out his defensive midfielder, not Fernandinho, not Rodri, neither. The 2021 Champions League final in Porto, Chelsea won 1-0. Guardiola's selection, no recognized defensive midfielder in the starting lineup, became the most analyzed single tactical decision of the modern era. The coach who had spent 15 years constructing the most detail-oriented defensive organization in club football had, in the game's most important match, removed its structural foundation. "I made mistakes," Guardiola said afterwards. "The manager was not good enough today." Not the players, not the conditions, the manager. The 2021 final didn't undermine the second revolution. The 2023 treble confirmed it 2 years later. What it did was locate the contradiction at the center of everything Guardiola builds. The same adventurousness that makes him willing to dismantle his own systems to build better ones is the same quality that produces decisions which no conventional football logic can explain or justify. The revolution and the implosion come from the same place. This is why the antagonist of his story is not Mourinho, not Klopp, not Ferguson. It is the version of himself that is always willing to remove the structure that keeps the system stable, in the belief that something better exists on the other side of that removal. The contradiction clarifies who he is. The historical record clarifies how rare that is. To understand what Guardiola has actually done, it helps to look at what no one else did. Johan Cruyff is the closest precedent, a revolution as a player with total football at Ajax and the Netherlands in the 1970s, then a revolution as a coach at Barcelona from 1988 to 1996. Two distinct contributions to how football was understood, but Cruyff's were in different roles. Player and coach are fundamentally different functions. The question of whether the same coaching mind can build two revolutions is different. Arrigo Sacchi comes next. AC Milan's pressing system from 1988 to 1992, one of the clearest antecedents of what Guardiola later developed, and then Italy at the 1994 World Cup final. But Italy 1994 was considered an adaptation of Sacchi's ideas to international football, not a second distinct revolution. Alex Ferguson managed Manchester United for 26 years and evolved continuously, from direct physical football in the 1980s to a more technical model in the 2000s. A long evolution is not two revolutions. It is one sustained project. The honest answer is this. No coach in the recorded history of European football has built two complete systemic revolutions in two different clubs, separated by a decade, at the highest level of the game. Guardiola has, once. The question of whether it can happen a third time has no precedent to answer it. There is no blueprint for what comes next. The blueprint was the man. Guardiola in 2009 was a coach who had inherited an idea and radicalized it. The false nine, the 6-second pressing, the spatial control, all extensions of Cruyff's original framework. The radicalization was the contribution. Guardiola in 2025 is a coach who had to dismantle his own idea to build something different. The inverted fullback, the no-striker system, the Rodri pivot, none of these existed in Barcelona. The second revolution was built by rejecting the solutions the first revolution had made famous. That is the pattern. Each revolution required Guardiola to stop copying what had already worked. The question then is not whether a third revolution is possible. The question is whether the version of Guardiola that could build it already exists, or whether it needs to be created by another context, another squad, another set of conditions that force him to dismantle what the second revolution built. At 53, with the City contract ending, the next decision is entirely open. What version of the game hasn't been solved yet? What context hasn't been tried? What system would require him to abandon everything the first two revolutions established? Those questions don't have answers from looking at the past. They only have answers from watching what happens next. If you've watched teams for 20 years and never stopped to ask what actually changed, subscribe and leave your answer in the comments. Has Guardiola already done the impossible once too often to do it again?